Hi folks, Al at ANH here for another Xone takeover of the Q&A sessions. Hope you're all well. We're slowly recovering from ADE last week, and this week I wanted to talk to you and walk through setup with the Xone 96 and Traktor Pro 3. It's relatively speaking a fairly straightforward setup, but there are a few gotchas perhaps and a few preferences you can choose or not. So we'll give you a quick run through of how to use the control vinyl setup for DVS using decks, external turntable, and running through the mixer. Talk about as well, if you've got time, using Traktor's effects as a send and return system, which is suitable to the 96 and other Xone mixers, and also some recording using Traktor as well. So those are questions we see commonly coming into our support interface and people chat to us about when we're out and about. Let me just run through for you the setup for DVS. So first thing you want to have obviously is Traktor Pro 3 installed and activated on your computer, and then ensure that the Xone 96 is connected. And if I take that out of the screen a second, you can see that today I'm going in here on USB 1, and I have the MIDI connection for that USB 1 interface also enabled. That's because I'm using a controller today, but we'll talk about that another time. Connect your turntables using DVS as you would do normally for a record. So you connect to the phono inputs. That is assuming, of course, you're using 1210s or something like that, and they are an RIAA output. If you are using turntables that have a line output, you can connect those into the line RCAs on the channel. But we would suggest you use the phono outputs if it's got it, and use our phono preamps, which are, I think we would be confident in saying, are better than most turntables that have the RIAA internally. So today, just so as you can see as well, I'm using one deck just to demonstrate this. I've got it coming in on channel 3 of the mixer, physically connected. So the same as you can see on screen 2 and my screen 2 here, I've got that physically connected into phono on input 3 on the back. Now for DVS time code, I want to set the USB source select switch for that channel pressed in for PH phono, so that the signal source going into Traktor is what's coming off the record. And in this case, that's a time code platter. To go back into Traktor and open up the preferences, you can see here my audio device is showing Xone 96 USB 1. I'm using a Mac. It would show ASIO on a PC, but it's core audio compliant with the Mac. And as I've said before, I'm connected physically to USB 1 on the back of the mixer there. If I was connecting to USB 2, that would be shown in the audio device, would come up as Xone 96 USB 2. Your sample rate settings and your buffer size for Traktor is largely dependent on the processing capacity of your computer. 44.1 should be fine for most cases. That's CD quality audio in reality, and less technical terms. I kind of prefer to default to 48. It's probably because of our heritage here at ANH is a sort of old school standard. You can, if your computer is up to it and not full of bloatware or loads of stuff going on in the background. Set the sample rate higher, up to 96K. You'll get slightly lower latency, and you can lower the buffer size as well. But again, that's a preference for you. I would suggest, if you're just starting out, leave it at 44.1. It should be fine. Hi folks, a few people in there already. If you can cover later how to create an echo kind of effect with some sense returns. Yes, Jad, I'm going to cover the effects routing using Traktor's effects and the 96 send and return system shortly. So just let me finish running through the DVS setup and use the right trackpad. So in the output routing for Traktor, and I'll go to this first rather than the input, make sure that you've got the mixing mode set to external. So Traktor will default to this if you plug in a 96, and output of deck A in Traktor is going to channel 2 left and right USB. So that's 3, 4 on the USB channels, and that's channel 2 on the mixer. Hopefully that makes sense. If I just show you here, that is this one. Yep, that is that one. Sorry, deck A is coming in on channel 2 of the mixer, and deck B is coming in on channel 3 of the mixer. Okay, my input sources to the mix are USB 1. Okay, so it's coming the output of Traktor into these 2 channels. If I go back onto Traktor, you can see here that this is set up for Traktor's kind of typical typical old school setup. 2 media players on the outside, C and D into channels 1 and 4, 2 turntables on the inside, A and B. You can switch those around a little bit. So if you wanted to have A, B, C, D across 1, 2, 3, 4 of the mixer, you can reassign these outputs for the USB channels accordingly. If you wanted to have your turntables on the outside and your media players on the inside, or you're using a mix of turntables and direct deck outputs with a controller, such as I'm kind of doing here, what I've actually got connected, if I go back to the screen there, it's just 2 channels for the example, and this one is connected to that turntable, and this one is just running an internal playback deck. But you can see that a little bit clearer here. So this is my turntable channel. This one is my internal playback deck output from Traktor, and these 2 at the moment I'm not using. So that's the output routing from Traktor. C, A, B, D. The input routing, and this is where the DVS comes in, you can see here, is just at the moment set up for the 2 decks. 3, 4 is channel 2 for deck A, and input to deck B is 5 and 6. That's channel 3 on the mixer. So if I just show you screen 2 now, let me take that one out of the way a sec. Repeat that, showing you the back of the mixer. So the physical inputs is my turntables plugged in to channel 2 of the mixer, USB channels 3, 4, channel 3 of the mixer, USB channels 5, 6. And that would be my turntables on the inside, for example, and 2 media players on the outside. Phono press down on those channels for turntables, and then to give you back the Traktor preferences for you. Hopefully then you can see what's going on there. Now you can't see at the moment any signal coming in to input deck B, which is what I'm using for timecode, but that is purely because I don't actually have a needle on this record at the moment, and I will show you that now. If I drop it down so you can see that signal coming in, there you go. That's the platter giving the timecode signal, and you can see that coming in to the software. At the moment it's not controlling the deck. Just want to walk you through the setup. The other two signals you can see down here, I have master left and right and an effects send, but I'll go back to those shortly. So just let me lift that back up again. And the next thing I want to go to is my timecode setup. You've got a choice between the internal playback or scratch control for these decks. So for the one that I have the turntables connected to, the ones I want to control with timecode, set those to scratch control for the playback mode. As I say, on this one, it's deck B, which I'm controlling via timecode. And if I drop the needle again, you'll see that signal come in there. You can also see it if you open the scope window within Traktor. And if you want to open that on the deck's layout, it's in the deck's layout panel. And you can see platter and scope here presented for each of the decks. So for the others that I'm not using, they're off. And for B, I've got the scope. You can have the platter if you wanted to do that sort of style. For the moment, I've got the scope so you can see the signal coming in. You can turn that on and off locally on the main screen, just clicking that arrow there. So if you want it out of your way once you're starting to mix, it's easily hideable. And then if it's the first time you're using it or something looks a little bit askew, you can calibrate that just to make sure the signal is going okay. You can see Traktor in the bottom there. Just recalibrating it. It's all ready. It's working okay for me today. And it's also telling me I'm using a 7-inch, which is what I have. Our 12 inches are still on the way back from ADE. So once you've done the timecode setup and the deck's layout, you can kind of close down the preferences really. But before I do that, what I'll show you in the mixer is another useful setting for particularly the Xone mixers, in terms of how Traktor's preferences and our signal path work together in the mix. I can see a few questions coming in. Let me just wander through this setup now and I'll get back to you guys, Akos, Robbie. I can see the questions. So in the mixer preferences for Traktor, using a 96 or a PX5, if you've got one of those, any of our current interfaces, to be frank, external mixing mode preferences down here, set the headroom. You've got a bunch of choices there. Set the headroom to -9 dB and apply the headroom to the channel meters. What you will then have is a most accurate representation on the meters for the conversion between the digital signal levels in Traktor and the analog metering and the analog signal that you're summing in the mix. The other stuff in there that I've got enabled, some of those are preferences. Filter type, if you're going to use that, why not set it to the Xone? Although you've got two VCF analog filters on the mixer, so you could choose a different one if you wanted to. The EQ type, again, is a personal preference. By all means, choose the Xone. That will give you 4 bands. Personally, I quite like to have an isolator if I'm using internal controls for EQ. But again, in the mix, generally speaking, it's the mixer's EQ and filters that I'd be working with. So those are largely subjective considerations in this kind of setup. Filter key, and the Q you're not really going to use because you're going to use the Q on the headphones. The balance and the gain, again, is local to the mixer itself. So those can be ignored or left at the defaults for Traktor. The main one is the -9 dB headroom setting, so that what you see coming into the mixer from the software reflects the dynamic range of the mixer as well. I'm just going to take that platter off because I've only got a 7-inch and it's run into the run out. And it's not doing anything at the minute in terms of the track, which I've got looped, because I don't have it set up to follow the vinyl. There's a couple of ways I can do that. Is either switch to absolute mode on loading, which is here, or when it leads in on the track. So if I was to switch that on, take that off again, and I start playing with the record, switch these in on here, and you can see now if I put my finger and stop that record, I'm now controlling the digital deck from a time code. Hopefully you can follow all of that. Any questions, fire them into the chat and I will respond on that. Again, the basics and the sort of step-by-step guide there is in the user guide as well. I think we might need to update it for Pro 3, but the steps that are outlined in the guide are fundamentally the same. Let's have a look at a few of your questions. Turn channel B doesn't push the right side of the stereo field anymore. When I cue it, it's fine in stereo in my headphones, but not through the main outs, booth, etc. Robbie, that's a support question. Nobody's emailed you back from ANH using a 9.6. I'm not going to try and troubleshoot that with you on a Q&A session because there's possibly a few too many things to run through with you individually. But please just double check that you're emailing us for support@alan-heath.com, and myself or Luke will get back to you. If you've already got a ticket open with us, Robbie, and you think we're not responding to you, jot your ticket number in the chat and I will pick it up after this session. Or if you've asked a question on the YouTube channel, which you're viewing this on, then again, just let me know where you've contacted us in the chat so I can pick that up following this session. Akos, most tracks export only 41 hertz, 41k hertz, 16-bit. Worth it to choose 32-bit mode at 48, or it causes more converting and CPU load in Traktor. Depends on your source audio, I guess you're saying. I mean, I tend to use WAVs if I'm using digital audio, if I can, unless in the example here, I have got beat ports, stuff coming in. But as I said at the start of the session, for most cases, the default settings, 44.1K and 24-bit, it's fine for that for most uses. Can we also show how to change the tempo on Traktor controller when using the 96? Let me show you that now. I think if I've got the jockey, if I use Traktor in DVS mode, as you can see, if I switch there, now that's gone to the position on the platter where I am. So let me just show you. If I pick this up, put that back in, you can see there now that's found the lead in. So that's now doing what the record does physically. If I jump it around, it'll jump about in the track. Hopefully you can see that alongside what I'm doing here on the record and on the screen as well. So I've lifted the stylus off, drop it onto the lead in, calibrates quickly, and then finds the track. As you can see there, I just jump that back into the loop. If you want to use the pitch control on that, then again, be in vinyl mode. If I start to turn that down on the deck, we should see it going. There's a little bit of latency on screen, but I have just dropped the pitch to +8 on the 1210. And if I slow it back down again, I'll turn it all the way down to -8. A little bit of latency on screen, but that is happening as I move the control. Again, another reason why you might not want to overstress your CPU if you're using the pitch fade and stuff like that. And you do have a few settings in Traktor as to quite how much that physical pitch adjustment makes to the tempo of the track. And Emiliano, thank you for adding that point. The next thing I want to just cover is, as somebody else had asked earlier in the chat, let me go back and find out who that was. Let's see a few of you here. That's Jad. Create an echo kind of effect with the send and returns. Going into Traktor's preferences, I showed you earlier my input and output routing. What I've got here down at the bottom for the input effects send external is set to USB channels 9 and 10, which is send 1 left and right on the mixer. So if I show you the overhead of my mixer, these two inputs into Traktor are coming from these controls here on the mixer, send 1 controls. Okay. The output routing for the same output effects return is down here on the output routing panel, output effects return. I've got that going out to 11 and 12 USB channels, which is the return B left and right on the mixer. So on the mixer, I've got it coming back in on this one. The reason I've got that there is so that I can show you there's some signal level. Hopefully you can see that on my camera. Let me just give it a little tweak this way. Oh, that's gone astray a bit. Excuse me. I'm coming in on return B here. If I want to do it one-to-one and come input into Traktor on 9 and 10 and output to the same 9 and 10 channels, I can do that here, and that'll come in on return A on the mixer over this side. And then for the input source for these channels, you'd set that to USB 1 or 2. I'm coming in on 1, So that'll be USB 1 for my return. And then on the effects panels itself, if I close that down a minute, what you will see is, bear with me, sorry. One other thing you want to check is the effects panel in the preferences. Set that from insert, which is a default on Traktor, to send, so that I'm routing in and out of Traktor using my hardware. So then if I close this down now, what that's created for this effects engine is my physical sends and returns here. Sends, returns. If I turn that one up, I'm going to leave that on the loop a minute, just so you can hear some audio with this. That's the track on its own, so no audio. If I set this pre so you can hear the effects coming back, and that's Traktor's effects doing that. If I show you, I've got a little MIDI controller doing that. I'm going to set my Traktor effects 100% wet, because all I want is the output of that effects unit coming back to my return. And I can send from my channel input, which is the output of deck B, to Traktor's effects. And that's coming back in on return A. So I'm using the hardware send controls to send to Traktor's effects engine, and then the interface to return the output of the effects engine back into the mixer. So that's proper, what I guess we would call hybrid mixing, using the software's audio and effects to mix in the real world with the analog signal paths that you're going to be listening to. I hope that makes sense and that you can follow that okay. It's only possible to send and return one effect. Can't we use both send 1 and 2 for different effects? Jad, that's a limitation within Traktor at the moment, unfortunately. If you have a look for the output routing, there's only one. Let me just bring that back on my screen for you so you can see it. In Traktor's preferences, they've only currently got one output and input effects return channel. You could use more of them, I guess, and sum them all to the same input and output. But again, then you're getting into sort of different territory where you're definitely going to want a controller to control the individual effects. So I could set all of these to be sends, and then they would all receive the signal from the mixer, but you would only be able to use one of the USB channels because there's only one effects send and return there in Traktor. Maybe if you want more effects than one, the thing to do is to set the effect that you've got there to group effects. And in that way, if you can see there, you've now got 3 effects that you can access using that single send and return system on the mixer. I hope that makes sense and you've followed that okay. The other thing that I wanted to cover today as well in terms of the sort of setup with the 96 or the Xone mixers and Traktor is external recording. So recording the mix output of your mixer back into Traktor software. Jockey, I'm using the send and return for recording in Traktor. Okay, so ideal. Look, this is why I wanted to show you this example, because as I say here, for my inputs, I've physically got 2 decks. I'm only using one, but a typical scenario, 2 turntables I've got set up. I know there are possibly people using 4 turntables for DVS, but they're in a minority. And I think if you want to do recording in that scenario, you're going to need a different piece of software to use it rather than in Traktor, or sort of slightly different methods and stuff like that. So this will work if you're using internal decks for playback through the mixer. This will work if you're using a couple of decks. Essentially, it will work in this scenario if you've got one spare send or one spare input to Traktor. So as I say, in this scenario, I'm not using physical inputs on the mixer. Let me bring those back for you so you can have a quick look. In this typical scenario, I've got 2 turntables connected here. I'm not connecting CDJs in this setup. For example, it's more of a sort of digital setup, so just using Traktor's internal playback modes, or maybe a couple of decks for DVS. So these 2 are free channels, or if I've got CDJs, media players connected here to the line inputs, but I'm not using that for time code, then this might be an option for you. But sorry, my bad there. I want to be back and show you this. For your recording, what I want to do is use one of my spare inputs into Traktor, and I'm going to set 11 and 12 as my USB channel inputs. And then on the mixer's top panel, make sure that I'm using USB 11 and 12 here, left up, so that it's sending the master output to USB channels 11 and 12 to an input on one of the decks in Traktor, spare input deck D. If I bring that audio back up, there you go, you'll see that there. It's pre-master levels on the output, physical output controls. That's so that during the night, or where I am, as I'm setting my ambient levels on the master, the signal that's going to the recorder isn't being affected. So I could start off with the ambient level to my speakers fairly low. As the night comes on, I want to turn that up. I'm going to use the master controls there. But the post-fade main mix levels are still constant here in the mix. Here in the mix recorder input. Then what I do, using those signals as my source, I go to the mix recorder and set this to external mode. My external input is any one of those, and as one of them said, they're already using the input effects. So if you want to kind of use these setups that I've shown, then I think in most case scenarios, we're seeing there's enough capacity for people's typical setups to kind of try this out and still use Traktor's recorder to capture your mixes. So like I say, I've got that set to input deck D. That's the signal coming in there. That's this one you can see on the meters in the mix recorder. It's externally, that's the source. And then if you have a look up here in the main screen, you can see that signal level there reflected in the recorder. So if I turn down physically my faders, you can see straight away that mix level is gone from the recording input. I'll bring that up. It's not affected by any of the levels that are coming that you're listening to or that I'm sending to speakers and so forth. Okay, and then all you need to do then is press record. In this case, as you can see, it's flagged up a warning for me because I'm streaming that audio from Beatport into Traktor. It doesn't want me to do that. DRM and such like, it's a fair call. There are some other ways that you could get around that. But if you're using your local audio and or external sources and you're not streaming, then you would be able to set the mix recorder on there. But you can see the signal path is in there. I hope that all kind of makes sense for you. For any internal recording by Traktor, you need to put the gain in Traktor audio recorder to +2 dB. Maybe. I'm not so sure about that. You don't want to clip it out. This is, don't forget, DBFS. So if you hit in the clip there, you're going to have a square wave signal in your recording. So we would sort of typically allow a bit of headroom and stuff like that. Say that's reflecting there on the meters in Traktor, where I've got, I think, on the meters on the mixer. If I turned that flat up, I would probably have to drive this really hard to get it back into that level. See there? If you're watching the Traktor meters there, I've turned that right up. It's peaking on the meters here. It's clipping the recording. So we like to keep a little bit of headroom so that I can add some filters and the effects returns and stuff like that. Once that's summed in the mix, that will push that level up. Okay, jockey, I'll take your word for that. Yeah, you can put the limiter on, of course. Again, a lot of these are sort of subjective to the particular tunes you're making or mixing, sorry, or the way that you want to capture your recording. So there's not hard and fast rules, these, but hopefully that info helps. If anybody's got any particular questions, let's have a look, see what we got here. Run back through a few others. TB UK. Is there no way to combine master? So B, here's master 2. In a setup host music USB A to a Mac PC setup scene without having to use that. Let me just reread that again. Is there no way to combine master? So B, here's master 2 in a setup. You're talking USB here. Master 1 and Master 2 levels are physical outputs. So if you wanted to, there is another way perhaps I can show you if you're already kind of using 1112 for a send output on the USB channels. There's a little workaround you can use to take a physical output. Let me show you here on this screen. That might enable you to do something like that. And I think I'm understanding kind of what you're asking, okay, in terms of master 1 or master 2. In this example, I've shown you that, so I would have a spare line input here, nothing connected to this line input. It could be any of the others that I don't want to use for timecode sources. And I connect from the record out on RCA to a line in here. I guess you could use master 2. But to be honest, they're the same signal path. They're tapped at the same place. The only difference that you have between the record out and master 2 in terms of where you're sourcing the signal is that you have a level control for master 2 up here. And again, for the purposes of recording, having that physical control maybe is not such an advantage because it's likely to get changed and kind of for recording you want a set level. So this would be the one we suggest. You can also use the audio sync out as a stereo output, tapping the same post fader pre-master level mix signal and then connect that into a spare line input, have the USB channel source selected up, so it's taking the line signal, and in this example it would be USB channels 7 and 8. So that will appear on USB 1 and USB 2. So if you have USB 1 running, for example, Traktor or other sources, outputs for that, and you've got a different computer that you want to record on, let me just close that down. So say in your scenario, TBUK, a couple of decks from Traktor running into a couple of channels, a couple of decks from something else or somebody else's computer. If it's digital sources to the mix, that's fine. Maybe my setup then would be A and B from USB 1 and A and B from a session on USB 2. That's fine. Internal deck modes. If you both wanted to use DVS, you could potentially hook that up as well if you're prepared to share the same platters or use 3. You've still got your spare USB input, which is either, as I've shown you previously, using 11 and 12 into your mix recorder, or the hardware jumper here. So again, I hope that kind of makes sense. I think so. Cool. Thank you for the feedback. I'm assuming the Eurostar means that you followed that and that all kind of made sense. 96 interface good enough to not have latency when linking Traktor and Ableton. It's not the interface that's the limitation there, Emiliano. It's going to be the CPU on your computer. Yeah, we absolutely would run Traktor and Ableton together. I think I've done some sessions in the past, and I'm happy to sort of revisit that again in the future, is that I would run typically Traktor as my source for decks and Ableton as a source for software effects, and I happily run those on the same computer with the latency settings on those and some remote control, so that would all work in real time. Again, depending on how dynamic you want to be with that sort of a mix, it might be how you set the sample rate and your buffer size, but that really is a function of your computer's CPU. So there's no limitations in terms of using the 9.6 on doing that. Absolutely you can do. As Robbie says, it's your CPU. And another reason why, to be fair, there's no particular reason in these sorts of scenarios where setting 44.1K as your sample rate will not be a problem for you. If you've got a really high-end spec computer, plenty of RAM on it, and it's a stripped down system dedicated to audio, by all means, ramp up the sample rate a little bit, cut the buffer size right down. If you're using kind of M1 processors now as well, if you're using the kind of modern computers, they're very, very capable for that sort of thing. So we'd love to see the Ableton Traktor setup. How to sync Ableton's effects on an older Ableton JAD. I did do one of those quite early on in these Xone takeover sessions, but I will certainly look to revisit that. I think next time TBUK do something in future reference to 9.6 and K2 send return. I'm going to look at K2 next time. So next month I'll be back again. We're into November. Be the last week in November. I'll be back here. I'm going to look at K2 and some mapping options for Traktor. We'll touch on live, but there's probably 2 sessions to focus on it. And how you can integrate the K2 as a MIDI controller using Xlink with the 9.6. The same principles here that I've shown on 9.6 today are also usable on PX5. So the same routing principles apply. The naming on the channels essentially again is in short, the first channel will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. On the PX5, you've only got 1 send, so that's 9, 10. If you're using a 23C or a 43C. You'd have 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 for the 23C, and the same 1 to 8. So I hope that makes sense. I know some people it's a little bit confusing, and talking about it, it makes it seem more confusing than it is. But hopefully the kind of screenshots that we're showing you will enable you to kind of play back through it. You can pause it. We'll try and bullet point some of these as well in some posts, some short form how-tos, visual step-by-step, so you can follow. Okay. Next week, I think Keith is going to be back talking about some SQ stuff. If you've got any questions on what you've seen or what I've said here today, please fire them into the comments on the channels that we're sharing this session on. We will look at them. We will try and respond to you. And if you've got other questions about different ways of using our mixers, things you're scratching your head about, some particular setup that you want to see, pop those into the questions and comments as well. And we will use that to ponder over and decide what our future sessions are going to be. As I say, we're running this once a month at the moment, last Thursday of the month, 3 p.m. UK time. So I hope this has been helpful for you guys, and see you next month.